Catherine Schultz, in her book Lost and Found, shared that on any given day, each of us misplaces roughly 9 objects. Steve just said, that's all? On average. Which means that by the time we turn 60, we will have lost nearly 200,000 things. Which also means that across the spans of our lives, we will spend roughly 6 months looking for missing objects. And funny enough, as our gadgets grow smaller, the odds of us losing them grows even larger. Some of the things that we lose are obvious. We lose our keys and our phones and our glasses and our socks and our passwords. But some of the things that we lose are far more significant. The loss of memory, the loss of independence, the loss of a piece or pieces of our identity, and of course, the loss of our loved ones. These are some of our most significant losses. But this year, more than anything, what seemed to be ubiquitous loss within our society was the loss of hope. So I began to think about hope, about where and why our hope has faded, and about how we might recover it. For me, it was in some specific moments that I found myself losing hope in the goodness of people this year. It was when I heard the news about Luigi Mangione stopping into a Starbucks for a drink and then making his way to the conference center where he waited for United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson to show up. Then he used his 3D printed pistol to kill him. Later into the year, it was Wesley LePatner who was killed. She was 43 years old, a mother of 2 young sons and a top executive at Blackstone. And on that faithful day, she was leaving work to meet up with a friend when Shane Tamura entered the lobby of her Midtown office building and opened fire. She tried to hide behind a marble pillar, but she too was killed. Both Brian Thompson and Wesley LePatner were loved. Wesley's death hit close to home as she was a young mother involved in the Jewish community. She sent her kids to a Jewish day school. She sat on the boards of her New York Federation and on the board of the Met. She mentored countless young women. She was described as compassionate, as driven, as generous and kind. Her funeral sent ripples throughout the Jewish world. These 2 assassinations, as well as the assassination of Charlie Kirk that would follow, were horrifying. But it was the reaction of the masses on social media in both of these moments that actually broke my heart. It was the way that people were celebrating murders, that people were applauding the murderers, that people were delighting in these victims' deaths. That was what threatened my sense of hope in the goodness of human beings. It was as if the street was agreeing that these horrifying things were actually fine, funny, just. And then there was the Coldplay incident, which also hurt my heart. Everyone knows the story, the kiss cam moment that the whole nation seemed to follow. The moment itself was unfortunate, and it quickly went viral. At first, people were having fun speculating. They rewatched a couple that was panicking and hiding from the unexpected spotlight that came their way at a concert. But then the memes and the jokes began to spread, and a fake apology circulated on email. And then there came the eruption of angry, judgmental, mocking, mean, and hate-filled commentary. On Yom Kippur, we focus on scapegoats. And this year, we have had so many scapegoats. This year, Brian Thompson took on people's accumulated anger toward the healthcare industry. Wesley LePatner carried people's antipathy for capitalism. And Byron and Cabot from the Kiss Cam, they took on the issues that people have with power, infidelity, workplace hierarchy, and rules. In a world that has more than its share of infidelity and immorality, somehow this became the greatest sin imaginable. It felt like the entire country gave themselves license to try this case. I wasn't shocked to know that evil exists. I was shocked, and I was devastated to see people cheering for it. I found myself wondering, what is happening to us? And when did we stop seeing one another's humanity? I felt like I was losing hope in people, in the collective us. Many of us have felt like we were losing a grip on hope this year. It may have been our hope in human beings. Maybe it was hope in leadership. Maybe it was hope in the media. Maybe it was hope in truth. Maybe it was hope for peace. Maybe it was hope in living in a compassionate and caring world. Or hope in people cherishing life, their own lives, and others' lives. If your sense of hope was challenged this year, which moments were the defining ones for you? And where did your hope feel most challenged? I am convinced, and I thank God every morning for the most precious gift in the world, which is to be a Jew. And to the Jewish people, hope is mandatory. Throughout our history, our ancient and our modern rabbis warned us never to give in to despair. And so I began to search for things that were big and small that gave me hope. I searched for things from the past year and even from the distant past that could and did restore my sense of hopefulness. And so the first person that I turned to was Theodore Herzl. Herzl, for the past 2 years, has helped me to remember the importance of dreaming audaciously and the strength of our human will. He's reminded me that extraordinary and unthinkable things happen when we work tirelessly to turn visions into reality. Some of you know Theodor Herzl's story. He was born in Budapest in 1860. He was raised in a cosmopolitan, intellectual, middle-class family that was deeply steeped in European culture. He himself was a patron of the arts. His family, interestingly enough, was not particularly religious. In fact, he was not interested in his Judaism as either a religion or a culture. He studied law, but he ended up going into journalism and spending his time covering politics, arts, and society stories. It was his coverage of the Alfred Dreyfus affair in France that actually deeply impacted him. He had grown up feeling integrated and accepted in European society, but when Herzl witnessed Alfred Dreyfus, who was falsely accused and wrongfully convicted of treason, and then sentenced to life in prison because he was a Jew, Herzl was deeply concerned. In the aftermath of the trial, he witnessed anti-Semitism unleashed and raging throughout Europe. And he was convinced that if the French, who prided themselves on equality and liberty and reason, could manifest such hatred towards the Jews, that Europe could never be a home to them. Even assimilated Jews, he realized, would always be outsiders, tolerated until they weren't. So Herzl envisioned the Jews returning to a Jewish homeland, the only place that he determined the Jewish people could really be free. He envisioned Zionism as a national liberation movement for oppressed Jews. And while his vision was met with opposition, he kept moving forward with his plans. He would write a pamphlet about the Jewish state. He would found the Zionist press to help him spread his message. He traveled and lobbied kings and diplomats, and finally in 1897, he brought Jews from all across Europe together in Basel, Switzerland. And after that conference in Basel, Herzl had the audacity to reflect in this way. He wrote, "At Basel, I founded the Jewish state." If I said this out loud today, he said, I would be met with universal laughter. Perhaps in 5 years, and certainly in 50, he wrote, everyone will see it. And Herzl was right. It was almost exactly 15 years later, after that conference in Basel, Switzerland, that the State of Israel was created. What Herzl had the courage to do was to have audacious hope. To have hope that things could be better for the Jews. To have hope that after thousands of years of wandering, that their exile could end and that we would finally return to a Jewish home. And it was Theodor Herzl who willed this dream into being. Another dose of hope. It came to me after sitting with my thoughts for months after reading Dara Horn's book called People Love Dead Jews. Now, many of you have read her book. Some of you may not have. Everyone should read it, really. But there is this one chapter in the book that I have been thinking about so often, and it is a chapter about the Jews of Harbin. So before reading Dara Horn's book, I had never, ever heard of Harbin, but neither had Dara Horn. They were famous for hosting an international ice festival, and so she got curious about this place. And she did some exploring, and it was then that she learned that there were actually synagogues in Harbin. And a little bit more digging, and she would learn that Harbin was actually built by Jews. Now brace yourself, because this place called Harbin is actually larger than New York. There are more than 16 million people who live in Harbin. But 130 years ago, Harbin was just a cluster of small fishing villages around a river bend. Russia and China had a huge project in the works. They were imagining creating a Trans-Siberian Railroad that would connect Moscow to China. And they needed to create the central place at the junction. That place, they were determined, would eventually become known as Harbin. So the big project required experienced entrepreneurs who could speak Russian. And it also required people who were willing to move to Manchuria. It was going to be a hard sell for sure, and they knew it. So the Minister of Finance had an idea. The Jews, he thought. And his idea made sense at the time. Hundreds of thousands of Jews are trying to get out of Russia because of anti-Semitic laws and pogroms. And the Russian regime knew that all they had to do was tell the Jews that they could live free of anti-Semitic restrictions, and the Jews would move there. And they were right. They did. The first Jews arrived in Harbin in 1898. And in less than 10 years, National Geographic magazine, remember that, wrote a feature story about Harbin. And they called it, and I quote, one of the greatest achievements that the world has ever witnessed. This sleepy, unpopulated fishing village, Jewish entrepreneurs created hotels, banks, pharmacies, insurance companies, department stores, and publishing houses. And the more they built, the more Jewish entrepreneurs and refugees would keep coming to this incredible place, until the Jewish community of Harbin reached nearly 20,000 Jews. 33 years in 1921, Harbin had 2 synagogues, a kosher butcher, a mikveh, a bakery, Jewish day schools, a hospital, a charity kitchen, a free loan society, an old age home, Jewish magazines, Jewish newspapers, Jewish music, a Jewish theater, Zionist clubs, Jewish country clubs, Jewish yacht clubs, and they even hosted international Zionist conferences. Harbin had it all. Until it didn't. Because in the early 1930s, the Japanese and the Russians partnered up, and later the Chinese would come in, and let's just say the story did not end well for the Jews. Most were murdered, kidnapped, tortured, or exiled. But those who were able to escape, they made their way to Israel. And for many decades, they continued to gather. And all those years later, they would tell the magnificent stories that they had about the golden age in Harbin. The reason that the story of Harbin lingered in my mind and in my soul wasn't because of the end of the Jewish community there. This would make it not exceptional. The story of Harbin lingered for me because it reminded me of how incredible our people are. Theodore Herzl knew how to envision and to will things into being. But it was the Jews of Harbin who gave me hope in our people's ability to create and to recreate, to build and to rebuild over and over and over and over again whenever we have needed to. And that when we put our minds to something, anything is possible. A third source of hope for me were the stories that have emerged over the past 2 years from Israel. The seemingly endless heroic stories of teenage girls who jumped into tanks, those who rushed to ammunition closets to distribute guns on their kibbutzim. It's the stories of 50-year-old dads who raced to the Gaza envelope from all over the country to protect and to defend. And it's the story of the 70-year-old grandfather who told his grandchildren, "I'm coming." And 10 years later, after stopping to rescue total strangers along the way, made it to rescue their family. "Saba higia," said one little girl after waiting with her family in the safe room. "Grandpa arrived." Somehow miraculously, he did, she did, they did, some did. In most places, when terror strikes, people run and they hide. And they try to keep themselves safe. They lock their doors. But in Israel, the stories are endless of people heading into the danger, heading toward the terror in order to save their loved ones and their neighbors, and most often in order to save and to rescue people that they didn't even know. It is these heroes that gave me hope in humanity, because their instincts were to help, protect, defend, rescue, sacrifice, and give. They reminded me of what human beings can and should be. This past week, I received a copy of Eli Sharabi's new book, Hostage. His book is the fastest-selling book in Israel's history, and the first memoir published by a released hostage. When Hamas terrorists stormed his kibbutz, where he and his family lived, Eli and his family were awakened to the familiar sounds of red alerts. And so he went into the kitchen, he put the kettle on, and he made a cup of tea for his wife and his girls, Noya, 16, and Yahel, 13 years old. And then Eli quickly realized that they weren't typical red alerts. And so he gathered them all together in Noya's room, which also functioned as their family safe room. But before long, 5 terrorists entered their home and surrounded them in Noya's room. Those terrorists dragged Eli out the door as his family sat frozen in horror. Out the door, he shouted out to his wife and his girls, I'll be back, as the terrorists dragged him out the front door and into Gaza. Somehow Ellie spent the next 491 agonizing days in the suffocating darkness of the tunnels in Gaza, chained every single one of those days. He would experience intentional starvation and physical and emotional abuse and isolation at times and loneliness while the war raged above him. But as his book would attest, he was strong and resilient and determined and faithful. And at every single moment of every single day, he chose life over and over again. For 491 days, he stayed clear about his why. He was going to survive. He was going to survive for his family, for his wife and his daughters. And after 491 days, he was finally set free. And it was his mother and his sister who were waiting. He understood immediately what that meant. The next day, Eli, on his first day of freedom, visited the peaceful field where his wife, Leanne, and his daughters, Noya and Yahel, were buried. And he wrote this in his memoir. He wrote, "Birds chirp, I break down crying. I don't even try to stop myself. My sister Osnat hugs me. I fall to my knees. I can't see anything. The sky, the view, the other headstones, the people who came with me, everything fades away. Only Yahel, Noya, and Leanne exist. After 40 minutes, I tell my sister, it's okay, let's go. I start walking slowly toward the exit of the cemetery. This here is rock bottom. I've seen it. I've touched it. Now, life. This is where Eli's book ends, but it is not where his story ends. Because every day since, Eli Sharabi has spent advocating for all of those still being held in captivity. He's traveled the world as a global advocate. He's met with presidents, he's spoken at the UN, and he's shared his message in every form imaginable with the world. And it is Eli who gives me hope in the power of faith and the power of love, and more than anything, in the strength and resilience of the human spirit. It is Eli who gives me hope that human beings can experience evil and never give up on goodness. That human beings can experience darkness and never give up on light. That we can experience profound loss and continue to embrace life. And so when I grope for hope this year, I have trained myself to narrow my focus and to hone in on the small and beautiful things that are everywhere. But I've also realized that it's when we zoom out really broadly that hope is everywhere. It lines our people's path to this day. Hope. It's what enabled our ancestors to leave Egypt even though they had no idea where they were going. Hope. It's what enabled our ancestors a generation later to cross over the Jordan River and into the Promised Land. Hope. It's what kept our people going after the temples were destroyed again and again in Jerusalem. And hope. It's what's kept our people going through exiles, pogroms, the Holocaust on October 7th. Hope. It's what's keeping our hostages fighting to live still. And hope is what has enabled the Jewish people to endure despite the odds for all time. Hope isn't passive. It's not a denial of reality. It is a practice. It is a muscle that needs to be exercised. Hope can be fostered and hope can be strengthened and hope can be felt. It can be felt every time we cheer for someone else's success and ascent rather than their destruction and demise. Hope can be found when we refuse to cancel people or dehumanize people, and instead choose to see people as human and capable of mistakes and growth. Hope can be found when we affirm other people rather than degrading them, and hope can be nurtured every day that we envision a better world like Herzl, every day that we work to build or rebuild that better world like the Jews of Harbin, and every time that we sacrifice for others and care for others, as the Israelis did on October 7th, and as Eli understood. Hope can be nurtured every day that we do something big or small to help someone, to find the good, to live with honor, to choose life, and to give others the strength to do the same. Each of us will inevitably lose hope at times. And each of us will also find hope at times. But this year, on the cusp of this new beautiful world and our new beautiful selves, may we truly open up our hearts to hope. Amen.